Asian,
Asian, other, Tamil.
Asian, other, Tamil.
Tamil.
Vanakkam, welcome to the Asian Other Tamil podcast,
a podcast that brings our experiences of being Tamil to the table.
so that we can create a community that feels accepted, connected, and empowered.
We're your hosts, Thanusha,
And Nishani,
and welcome to the sequel to the prequel. This is part 2 of our episode Dating.
a deep dive. So we are in different clothes, as you'll notice, to what the episode is gonna unfold as, because we recorded this episode Mudala, and then we were like, actually, I think we need some context,
Yeah.
or like let's rewind it a bit.
I think we sort of went back to the drawing board a little bit. We were just
Yes.
like we were just sort of like doing a debrief.
Yes.
And then we realized, you know what? There definitely is more that we can add to this episode.
Yeah.
We're just embracing it. Okay.
Yes.
We want to make you guys a part of our creative journey, so you understand that like it's not all put together.
Yeah.
I feel like you guys will relate to part 1
Yes.
a lot from just like a nostalgia perspective,
Yes.
and it being like fun and a trip down memory
Yeah.
lane, which we like to do quite a
Yes.
bit. But this part of it, I think, will also be quite relatable from an introspective
in terms
perspective
of
and-
like issues you may have dealt with growing up, childhood issues, or dealing with, and how that sort of transpires into relationship, and how that
I think it's also just like this is the side of the episode where we sort of like talk about some of like the realities when it
Yeah.
comes to relationships. And as much as Kadal and love is like the castle in the sky, and
Yeah.
you know, it's that, you know, sending you down a garden path. Yeah, it is, and it can be, but there are real trying times that come with
Yeah.
it as well.
Yeah.
And some of that is you knowing yourself and how you are better for you so you can be better for them.
there's just a lot that comes up that you might be like, oh my god, I didn't know that, or oh my
Yeah.
god, I've definitely thought that.
Thought-provoking,
I've definitely
for
thought
sure.
that, and you're like, oh shit, I didn't realize it was a
Or
thing,
like, oh, I experienced something like that,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't have thought,
Yeah.
or maybe I didn't think that might have been why.
Yeah.
So we hope that you enjoy the episode. Stay tuned, and we'll meet you in a different set of clothes in a bit, okay?
wrapping up season 1, thinking about season 2, it was, what is something that we just don't talk about? Let's talk about it. Let's talk about dating.
100%. It was also a lot of the feedback we got.
Yeah.
A lot of you guys and girls were like, talk about dating, talk about relationships, and like all the intricacies. And so, you know, we can take some feedback, and we want to deliver what you asked for, and here we are.
Yeah, I don't think when we were growing up we ever thought we ever envisioned a future like this in terms of dating, and also it being so culturally competent in terms of, like you said, choosing someone who you want to be Tamil or whatever you would like them to be, really. And I think when it comes to our parents, I actually do think it has eased a lot of the burden that they do feel in terms of, we trust you to like go and find someone. Or I do think.
Interesting.
I do think there is, because I think it sounds so patriarchal, but especially with women, the older the woman gets, parents tend to worry. So when you do get to an age of like 28, 29, you're like, you know what? I've been on an app. I've met someone. And it's Tamil and it's all good and all of that, ticks all the boxes.
Yeah.
Often your parents are going to be like, oh my God, bring him to the house. You know, like,
It's so interesting.
I do think, and especially because when I've seen it with a lot of my friends or
Yeah.
cousins even, I do notice that, you know, they find someone on an app, they tell their parents, and it's actually gone quite swimmingly.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
gone fairly nicely. Obviously, I'm not speaking for everybody who's had an experience with a dating
Yeah,
app.
100%.
But I do think, I think for them it's like, Appa, we don't have to.
Yes,
We
I do
don't have
think there
to,
is that
yeah.
element as well, and I think there is also this like tricky little dance you have to dance with your
Yeah,
parents. So like
yeah.
when they are really keen to get you married and they will inquire naturally, because like for them, I think it's they still have porupu to like
Yeah.
make sure you're settled in life. So they are going to start doing like arranged marriage inquiries and try to find you someone. And then
Yeah.
on the flip of that, you're also like on apps.
Yeah.
It then creates like somewhat of like a bit of a dance to dance
Yeah.
because you're trying to find someone yourself, but your parents are also trying to find someone.
You're just
for
trying
you.
to maximize opportunities. You know, that's what we're trying to do.
Exposure
Visibility
is
is important. It's funny because as you know, we evolve as females, and it was International Women's Day, and there was a post. It was a Man Enough podcast, right? And
oh my gosh, I love
it-
that. When Jamie is like, "What makes you?"
no,
Oh.
no, it gets deeper. It gets deeper. It gets deeper. Because that one is a great that
I love
conversation
that
in
clip.
itself is
Yeah,
fantastic.
Yeah.
But a few slides in, what's her name? Feminist Fabulous? Is it Liz Plank? Is that her
Yeah.
name? Yeah. So she's one of the hosts on the Man Enough podcast. And she'd posted for International Women's Day. And on, I think, the third or fourth swipey thing was her female friendships and relationships are so rich
Yeah.
and intimate
Yeah.
and intellectual.
Yes.
She struggles to find that in men.
Yes.
And like whenever she does have a conversation with a man, she ends up having to go back down several notches and like start from scratch. And she was like, that's an exhausting procedure
Yeah.
every single time.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a girlfriend recently, and we are talking about, and you know, she's on the market. She's looking for someone, and she was saying, and we were talking about what would you like in a partner? What's like your top 3? And she said, it's gonna sound, I might not put this in the actual episode.
That's fine. We'll
She
figure it
said
out.
Emotional intelligence. I would love emotional intelligence. as a
That's on my
counterpart.
list.
Yeah, but I burst out laughing
Why?
because I don't think that's achievable.
Oh my. Oh.
I was like,
Mahal, don't
no,
say
like,
that.
No, I literally.
I
was
understand
like,
you're trying to be practical here, but allow
I
us
was
to
like,
have
I
hope.
was like, I think you need to allow yourself some room for error bars. Like, not like a plus 10%, minus 10, like a plus 50, minus 50. Because so much of your emotional intelligence and how, you know, and I'm not even saying, you know, men, is everyone, right?
Absolutely.
We know generally in the population, emotional intelligence is something that can go quite amiss.
And I think it's also like important to note that there are definitely women who lack serious emotional intelligence
Absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely.
Like it is not like a we're out here to neg on on the fellas.
No, absolutely. Like people in general.
Yes. Yeah.
And, you know, the not having the emotional intelligence or not having, and she's expecting this person that she meets in the future to have sort of the same level. She's a very emotionally intelligent woman. And I said to her, that's great. But for her, it was like, Irukonam. Illati illa. And I said, it's journey. I feel like emotional intelligence, especially in a couple, is an uphill.
100%. But I
journey.
think individualistically,
Yeah.
I think in this dating age that we're currently in, like there are so many sources available to us that are like accessible.
Yeah.
Where we even if we are the there's like all that like cliche stuff where it's just like be the person you want to be with, number one.
Yeah.
Right? So like if you want emotional intelligence, check your own emotional intelligence. And there
Yeah.
are so many sources available these days where you can work on yourself. Like
Yeah.
if anyone can change, you can change yourself. I sound
Absolutely.
so preachy, but I was
Yeah.
listening to it on a podcast.
No, but it's
and it
true
was
though.
like we go into dating apps and we're like, we want this, right?
Do we?
But
ever-
it's like,
yeah.
do we like, and she said it so simply. She was just like, we can change ourselves. Like
Yeah.
we can read more, we can look into ourselves a little more, we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
do a bit more self-awareness
Yeah.
work. And like we have the capability of completely changing
Absolutely.
ourselves
Yeah.
to be what we would want in a partner.
Yeah, all that growth. And often, you know,
Absolutely.
going back to dating and arranged marriages, you're looking for someone, you know, who you're going to spend the rest of your life with. You're going to have a lot of hardship. In terms of, you know, working on yourself and trying to be better for your other half, or just even better for yourself going forward, Esther Perel is fantastic. I've written her an intro as if she's a guest on the podcast today.
Manifest it, baby.
But she's fantastic, and she, you know what, let me do her intro first, because then
Please do. I'm
Esther
excited
Perel.
to hear this.
It's Esther Perel is an award-winning psychotherapist.
No, you now need to carry on like that.
Oh no. Oh no.
I'm joking.
She has really no. So she's released 2 books. She's an international advisor on relationships and sex. Ooh, bringing the S word into the episode. She's given 2 TED Talks. She hosts 2 podcasts. She runs a series of therapy sessions and also training. She was on Oprah Winfrey's list.
Also,
She was also on Oprah.
Yeah.
On Oprah Winfrey's. No,
Honestly.
why is Oprah Greek? I don't know. She was on Oprah Winfrey's Super Soul list, like top 100 of the most like visionary and influential leaders in the world. So she's a psychotherapist, and if anyone needs free relationship counseling, this podcast is where it's at. I cannot stress
This podcast.
No, also this one, of course. We are manifesting.
Her one.
She is. Yeah. So her podcast is called Where Should We Begin? And a lot of it is, so I'm not quite sure how it used to run, but the recent seasons, she sort of has people write into her about her problems, relationship issues, and then she will call them in, like on the phone or Zoom or whatever, and talk to them about their issues, and that then becomes the episode for the podcast.
Where should we begin?
Yes.
Oh,
And it's
I really
fantastic.
like that. I really
It's
like
fantastic. And I started listening to Esther Perel, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. But at that time, no, probably even longer than that. But when I started, it wasn't something that I was ever like, I never took it too seriously. And then, you know, I think once my dating life became a little bit more serious, actually, I take that back. Some of the stuff she says hits really hard.
Yeah.
Especially when you're like a single person, because it does provoke a lot of introspection, and a lot of it is very hard hitting and can be quite triggering.
Yeah.
A lot of it is quite triggering, and so I've listened to so many episodes, and I have naturally spoken to my husband about and relayed everything I've heard in the episode. And we sometimes, often on car journeys, we'll listen to episodes together as well.
That's cute.
Yeah, we do, and we kind of like debrief about that. And it's interesting because it comes back to emotional intelligence. A lot of the stuff I'm like, yeah, man, preach. Like, I've been feeling this my entire life. And then my husband will be watching me listen to the episode, and he's like, light bulbs are going off in his head. He's like, oh my God, that explains so much. Or, oh my God, I can completely see why you're angry at men all the time.
No. Oh my God, hilarious.
And it's like, do you see why it's a chore when I have to explain everything to you? Because
Yeah.
our lived experiences are so different in our society. So, and when I was thinking about what I'd like to talk about in terms of dating in this episode, I kind of went back to the episodes and sort of did like a, you know, what's those things where you have like those lucky spinners and you just kind of like select a couple of episodes and see where it takes you to kind of like
a lottery.
yes, like one of those.
I know what you mean. Like a Price is Right someone.
Yeah. And then it was like, oh, ding, 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 ding. Today we have landed on self-love. It was like that.
Shout out if you know what Price is Right.
And it was exactly that. And so when I was doing, you know, like listening in terms of what I'd like to raise, I was like, let me just go through some of her episodes, see what she has to bring to the table, and see if any of that is relevant to a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. And the great thing is she works with a lot of South Asians. Yeah.
I've only listened to her here and there, but I think I've absorbed the most of her stuff through reels.
Okay, yeah.
Like short snippets.
Punchy, yeah. But like I would definitely listen to her episodes. They're so powerful. And so I've sort of done my listening and I've come up with 3 topics that I think I would like to raise today, and only because a lot of it has to do with undoing generational trauma, which we are always talking about. And the first one is self-love. Which I think is, especially in dating, so it's overlooked a lot. But what was really nice about this particular episode was it was a Pakistani woman who'd come to the table to basically talk about how she felt like she was passed up on a promotion. So Esther was like, why do you feel like you weren't? And she said, because I clearly wasn't good enough for the promotion. And she said, but did you even talk to your manager did you ask them why you didn't? And she said, no, because if I was good enough, they would have given it to me. And that's how the conversation began. And it basically unpacking that conversation, it was talking about how, as she's raised in like an immigrant family, a lot of the conversation in our households is, in Nevela Sayabora, how can you give back to the community? How can you help the community? How can we do things as a collective?
Mm-hmm.
And this sort of individualistic, I need to look after myself mindset is just not instilled in us.
No.
And that's not just a female thing. I think that's across everyone. We are kind of, you know, a part of us does always want to think about, it's like that sort of, you know, the herd. Are we bringing the herd with us?
Yeah.
You know, it's not about one person leads and we sort of follow. It's the constant conversation of how can we do better? How can we be better as a collective? And so that was like the first. And I thought that was quite interesting because I've never really thought of community in that way before, but we do hold on to community so much.
Absolutely.
In our culture, like so much.
Oh my God. Like it's what I think it's the fuel that drives our parents.
Basically. Yeah.
Like
And
everything is community. Like the whole like ஆக்கலன்னு சொல்லுவாங்க அதையே you can just use that foundationally.
Yeah.
And like even still there's like a lot of like it's how selflessness is instilled in us. Like you have to be willing to help and go over and beyond constantly. And forsake your boundaries and all of that, because that is how you are perceived as selfless.
Absolutely. And so that's how it began. And it was talking about how the Western culture itself is a very individualistic mindset.
Yes.
Whereas Ungal culture is completely the opposite. So already when you are entering this world, you are struggling with marrying the two already. That is an ongoing problem for us as immigrant, Asian, you know, ethnic minority people. That's a big issue because we don't understand. And it's really nice because it kind of circled back to season 1 episode when, you know, in school you're taught to stick your hand up and
be assertive,
volunteer and assertive and, you know, be like, speak up for yourself. But at home you're told, or
even just like children are to be seen and not heard.
Like be quiet, sit there, sit still.
Like all of that.
All of that. Fine. So that was really interesting. And going from there, she then started talking about her relationship. I've done my cards.
She's done a Thanusha, guys. She's pulled a Thanusha. I've come by 1 card only.
I've got 5. And so marrying that and literally and both metaphorically is challenge number 1.
Yeah.
Challenge number 1, already we're like, oh, this is tough. You don't realize that this is the challenge you're having. I think she sort of verbalized it quite nicely. And then it's also like we're praised to have all these credentials, all these accolades, all these, you know, pattangal associated with us. And even with all of this, we're still not empowered to ask for what is ours because we haven't been given the voice or the platform to express self-love. Self-respect.
And I think it's also so common with children from immigrant families because when they came to this country, they did everything in their power to just lay low, keep your head down, do your work, earn your money, come home. You don't go asking for things and ruffling feathers. And it's you
just
can
adding
see
on to that, not asking for what you want
or what you deserve
literally benefits everyone except you.
Yes.
Which is what was, and I thought that was like stark in the episode. As a take home message, you are again fitting yourself into a box that you've been told you should be in and you just put yourself there. So can you imagine already when someone's telling them about a promotion you're passed up on, this is the deep rooted issues that fall behind that origin situation. So then it got really interesting because what was happening was this woman was having issues in her personal life, her marital life, to the point where the person she was going to marry, I think the fiance almost cheated on her like a week before the wedding. And she couldn't even talk about it with him because she felt like she had no right to say anything. And then it gets a bit genderized here because a woman, especially for marriage, from the beginning, we are told exactly what is expected of us. in terms of when it comes to a marriage, exactly what you should be. You are told, whether you choose to follow it or not, that's entirely up to you.
Yeah.
But subliminally, that conversation is happening around you all the time. All the time. Even though you are fighting it actively and you're telling your mums off and your aunts and your dads or whatever,
Yeah, man.
that conversation is still ongoing. It doesn't
Yeah.
stop. Even after marriage, it doesn't stop. And you
Yeah.
are actively like, no, I don't want to do this. But it's still ongoing. No one ever stops having that conversation. And so because it's genderized and women are told, when she's entered the marriage, she's found that her husband, also Pakistani background, he's turned around and said, actually, I don't want to do some of these things that you're putting on me. Whereas it seems for him that a lot of the things put on him are optional.
Yeah.
It's
And
like he
he's
has a choice.
empowered enough to have that
Yes,
conversation.
yeah. And he's, he's basically said, actually, I don't really feel like doing that. And what she's done is she's gone, oh, okay, you don't want to do that. That's fine. I'll do it. And then has completely internalized that entire scenario. And then over time has sort of collected a list of things that she then low-key resents him for.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then has come back to him and he's gone, why would you not have said that when it was happening at the time? And she's gone, I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't think. I couldn't. Because she doesn't know what standing up for herself is like. And unfortunately, it does happen to a lot of women. It also just happens to a lot of men. It happens in our community. It happens, it does work both ways.
Yeah, for sure.
It absolutely works both ways. But that's because we haven't been told to sort of stand up for ourselves, because the minute we do, we're taking up too much space, too much emotional space in the relationship. And that was the episode. And, and then it ended really nicely, with Esther sort of saying, you need to understand that, sorry, my cards are wrong way again, sort of removing the idea of, speaking up for yourself is selfish, for sure. Remove that completely from your brains, but also think of it as speaking up for yourself not only helps you, but it helps your relationship. Like, it's beneficial to both parties. And understanding that is really important. And that's the way, if you were to market speaking up for yourself to those who don't, it's not about just you, actually. It's about both of you. And how can you be better? Because if you don't say anything, it's very difficult to move, to improve, to grow.
It's also the unspoken, the expectations that you have. So like, where she has gone to ask him to do these things and he has been able to turn around and say, actually, no.
Yeah.
She's then had to internalize it, because she would have had an expectation that he would say yes.
Yeah.
And then that ongoing cycle of her expectations not being met is what drives that resentment.
Absolutely.
And I feel like a lot of us don't necessarily recognize that is even happening to us until that resentment is there and has presented itself.
Unfortunately, yeah.
And I think it's so common as well. And it's not even just in romantic relationships. It can happen in friendships. It can happen in the workplace. It can happen with your parents.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
And you touched on it so nicely in that when you're raised the way we are by parents who also were raised to be even less seen and like heard. They were raised by a generation even less emotionally intelligent than they are. And like, they're not that great emotionally intelligently. They would expect that of us.
Yeah.
And so it is cutting that generational trauma and breaking those generational cycles.
Yeah. And it's, I think a lot of it doesn't necessarily have to be romantic. It's also, standing up to your parents or having a conversation with them about something that's deeply troubling you.
Yeah.
I think there's also a big narrative of Amma Papavam. I don't want to talk to them about a couple of things because they've gone through a lot. They've had a hard life, and I don't want to say anything that is going to trigger them or is going to bring some. I don't want to like disturb the peace that they have cultivated. But actually, it's not peace if you aren't feeling that too.
Yeah,
it's not peace if you aren't at peace. And so self-love as a theme, when I stumbled upon it in the last couple of weeks, I thought was very important. And I think
100%.
it's such a common thread in dating.
When you you touched on earlier, with certain narratives being driven in certain ways where it's like personal attributes need to be there, when it comes to women accepting a partner, generally they want you to not have any standards.
Yeah.
In
We
terms
used to like
of
go back to the Solar Empire when women would just choose their mandem.
100%.
Like, what happened to that?
I don't know.
Where did
I'm
the
still
power go?
trying to do the calculations. Do we carry it over? What happened?
Does it come back eventually? Where did we lose that
Yeah.
autonomy to make our own decisions about who we choose to spend the rest of our bloody lives with?
Yeah.
Where did that go? Just everyone needs to be just channeling their Kundave energy. Like,
Honestly.
I don't know. So speaking about unlearning, we go to our second theme concept of Esther Perel. So this episode was called Still Single at 40. And it was a British man who was talking about, and he articulated himself really well, like really, really well. And it was quite a triggering episode also. Like I was getting very triggered as the episode sort of proceeded. And he was saying he hasn't had a relationship for more than 4 to 5 months ever in his life, but he can be very charming. His friends say he's got Riz.
Down with the kids.
Which I only found out was short for charisma. Did you know that? I didn't know that. Which makes me feel a lot better about the word, because I didn't know what Riz was.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. I was watching a Dune Part 2 interview, and Austin Butler was like, he's so suave. The interviewer was like, who on the set has Riz? And he went, so who's got the most charisma? And I was like, thank you for educating the entire world. So yeah, which is what Riz is short for. If you didn't know, you know. And his friends describe him as someone who's got game, he's pretty good, whatever, but he can't seem to make a relationship last for more than 4 to 5 months.
Interesting.
And they were talking about that, and the conversation was how he either becomes super, like the attachment style becomes super anxious or super avoidant. Do you want to talk about attachment styles here? There are 3 types of attachment styles. Secure attachment style, which is basically you formed a very good, healthy relationship. You can voice what you'd like to say.
Yeah.
It's, the boundaries are in place.
And it was a psychological study conducted on small children. So it's sort of what forms a basis, and we'd advise you to go do like your
Please
own looking into it
Yes.
yourself as well, just if you're curious.
Yeah.
Is that these attachment styles are usually born out of how your parent-child relationship is, or like a child's relationship with their primary caregiver. And that is what sort of forms the basis of these 3 attachment types. And like it's of course met its sort of scrutiny and criticism as well. So we definitely advise that you guys go look into it. But as you were saying, go on to the other one. So that's
secure. The second is anxious attachment type. So that's the kind of person that when you've experiencing an issue, you're often going to be quite worried about confronting the problem. Mm-hmm. It can cause overthinking, anxiety, a lot of I see it as sometimes hypothetically trying to answer what the other person is already going to say.
Yes.
A lot of replaying things in your head.
Yes.
That's anxious. So you're quite an anxious person in this relationship, in a particular relationship. And the last one is avoidant attachment style, which is basically you just avoid confrontation. It will kind of settle itself. It will pass. I don't really need to raise it right now.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine. We'll deal with it later, which is my favorite. We'll deal with it later.
Yeah.
And so it's important that you don't necessarily fit into one of these boxes.
You may, but I think you're more likely to like teeter.
Yeah. It's like, so it's, you end up sort of, some relationships you might have a secure attachment style, some, or like just say with a sibling or maybe your husband. But some relationships, may not, you might be anxious in them or you might be avoidant in them. So I think just for myself speaking, personally, I can definitely identify where I'm secure, anxious and avoidant in all 3 aspects of my life.
Yeah,
so,
fair.
And like secure, I've got good relationships with my sibling and my husband. I'm very secure. I feel very comfortable to vocalize whatever it is I'm feeling, and I'm very comfortable putting boundaries. I'm anxious generally with my external relationships, so friends, family, distant relatives, I'm constantly like, oh God, like,
Yeah.
am I doing my best?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And avoidant, which I only discovered last year in therapy with my own emotions, because I think a lot of people are quite avoidant, especially in our community,
Yeah.
because we're always
It
like,
makes sense though.
yeah, because, and I think a lot of people might think they're pretty secure with themselves, but actually it's very easy to not realize that you might be quite avoidant.
Yeah.
In that, you know, because you only have to deal with your emotions, you don't really have to deal with them. Because it only affects you, who is the most important person in your life, or should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Or
did
should
you get
be.
shady in here suddenly?
No, but it's true. It's because it's you and you
Yeah.
are around all the time. It's like, we'll do it later.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're talking about, attachment styles. And so going back to the Still Single at 40 episode, this guy was talking about how he generally, you know, he can exhibit both attachment styles in relationships that he's been in at the end. So he gets really clingy sometimes he gets really avoidant. He also said in some relationships he will completely withdraw sex. It's off the table, because then that means instantly like a physical connection is broken. So the relationship will just end itself. Which I thought was quite interesting. It was a really interesting way to just dead something. Like physical intimacy just taken off the table. So that was cool. That was, I say cool because it was interesting, not cool. But that was interesting. And then so Esther was sort of unpacking that, and it turns out that he was a child of divorced parents. I think they got divorced when he was younger, much younger. And he has an older sister who's very vocal.
Okay.
Very, very much stands up for herself and the family. And she's like, you know, she's the street fighter of that family. She's doing everyone's work. And he kind of got away with not really saying much.
Fine.
Because she would do a lot of the talking. And he, you know, he says it wasn't really in his place to do any of that. When Esther was asking, you know, when they were unpacking the divorce, she asked him, why did you not confront your parents? You know, I think it's happened. He's 40, and I think it happened when he was like 5 or 6.
Wow.
So you're talking about 35 years of not having, why did you divorce mum, or why did you divorce dad? Not having that conversation.
Okay,
and just avoiding it. Right. And when you go on to sort of probe further as to why he does, what happened in the divorce is he ended up becoming the male that his mother leaned on.
Yeah.
During the divorce. And she consumed so much of like the air in that relationship and the emotional space. He never felt comfortable for speaking up for himself. He was always the person who had to stand up and be the man, because the father was absent. And I thought it was really heartbreaking to hear like a 40-year-old man, you know, talking about issues that have been going on since he was like 5-6 years old.
Yeah.
It was, and tough. He was crying in the episode. He was crying and I was crying. It was really intense. It was really intense, but I'm glad he's managed to have that conversation with Esther. And he was saying I cannot have that conversation with my father as to why you divorced mum, like straight up. I could never. It's too painful. It goes back to memories I don't want to think about.
Yeah.
I don't really think he's put any boundaries down. What he has done is he's just avoided it completely for 35 years. And I thought what was really interesting about that is it's not just about coming from a household where divorce has happened. It's just about childhood trauma.
Yes.
Generally.
Yes.
And how much it can affect us without knowing it actually has.
100%.
And how much we don't talk about, oh my God, that happened when I was young. And actually, I really wish I had gone to someone to unpack that. And that's kind of what it stirred in me anyway. And I thought that was just so important, because so many of us, you know, second generation kids are just struggling with I think our normality of what parents should be is so different. Or like what we think of what a romantic relationship should be is so different to what it probably should be.
Yeah.
Especially when you're growing up.
You know what? Yeah. That is a massive statement that you've just made.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I think we grow up thinking a lot of chaos is the norm. A lot of hardship is the norm. And I'm not faulting our parents, but, you know, I grew up in an environment where there was a lot of shouting.
Yeah.
Like, and it wasn't malicious. Their parents had a great marriage in their eyes. I mean, there's always room for improvement in my eyes. But
okay, then.
I think the way they sort of dealt with things, it worked for them.
Yes.
It worked, and it was, you know, a smooth sailing ship for them, and that worked. But growing up and being married, I know now when they're shouting in my household, I'm instantly triggered.
Yeah.
I'm instantly overstimulated. I had to explain to my husband what being overstimulated was the other day. I was in the kitchen, the tap was running, the extractor fan was on, the kettle was boiling, and he came in screaming, like singing a song. And I had to be like, stop. I was like, my brain's going to burst. There's so many sounds in this room right now. And he looked at me like, she's mad. I'm just singing like what you said or whatever it was. And he looked at me like, this woman's gone mad. I was like, no, but like, you need to understand, like, there's so much happening in here. And it's actually like, I'm triggered from when I was like a 10-year-old with just like the house being just generally chaotic.
Yeah.
And when I go to other people's houses now and it's chaotic, I'm like, oh, make it stop. But you know, it's a lot of that. It's yeah.
And you know what is crazy about that? It's such a, like in a lot of our upbringings,
yeah.
like a shouty, I feel like
Yeah, so
us
normal,
as
like,
a community
yeah,
are just shouty people.
Very,
And I've heard a lot of people from our generation, like our age, who are just like, when they want to go to the temple, they will only go when it's quiet. And they won't go during like Tiruvalaneram.
It's too much.
Because it's sensory overload. And it's also hella triggering. Like the emotional dysregularity.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Is really, I think as an adult, if you've sort of moved away from being exposed to that quite frequently, when it does pop up, it's just like, it's massive. And like, even for you, like being in the kitchen, there are no parents around.
No.
You are not in the temple.
It's just noises.
It's
Like,
just the noises. It's
yeah,
just the,
yeah. Or I think it's also having, like, at that time, I did not have the capacity to deal with that in that moment in time. But also, when I go temple, I've, like, prepared myself to deal with that. So I know Tiruvalaneram is going to be like this.
Yes.
And, you know, like, it's understanding, like, your triggers, your cues, what you're comfortable with.
That.
What you're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think also, like, the temple is a bigger space, so noise is a little bit more diffused. My kitchen can be smaller, so everything seems a little bit more intense. I don't know. I really don't know.
Mate,
but anyway,
the temple might be bigger, but they make that sound stretch.
Yeah. Also, yeah, it's loud. It's loud, and I don't know. So it was all of that, and I was just thinking about the relationships that we were. You know, our ideal marriage relationships in our head, Valareke, was our parents. They were the example of what a kalyanam should be, what a marriage should look like. And it's okay to turn around and say, actually, I don't agree with some of the stuff that you did, Amma or Appa. Like, I don't like it at all, in fact. And I would like to change that in my marriage.
Yeah.
In my relationship.
Yeah. And I think what is important is, I'd say, like, that's your experience being a child coming from a home where your parents were together.
Yeah.
Whereas my experience is that my parents weren't together.
Yeah.
So when I looked at my parents' marriage, it was very much just like, this is what I do not want. Like, all the way through it. So I idealized
this
instead. I idealized what was
was normal, ideal, whatever it should look like.
Couples that were together.
Thinking about, you know, childhood and how you were raised and how you were parented, you don't necessarily realize. I think, you know, I cannot stress this enough. When you go to therapy, all your problems will be before you turn to 10. And it's like, or like, it's wild how many of your issues go back to when you were like chinnan. It's not okay that so much of your life where you are being molded is where all your problems lie. And it's such a crucial neurological, emotional development process that is so overlooked, because we just think chinnapiladane, like, and you go back to and you're like, oh my God, like, I didn't realize, I had no idea this is why I was affected.
Yeah. And I think it's also, there is this perception that young children don't understand. And whilst they might not understand what is happening in front of them or the context, and they don't have that vivaram, absolutely, children are like sponges at that age.
Yes.
They absorb everything, particularly energy. Like, I think back at things that trigger me and I'm like, you're right. I'm like a 4-year-old Thanusha in that moment. I'm instantly just like, I don't like this. And like I go into like fight or flight mode instantly, and I'm just like, oh no, because it's
too
what
much.
I absorbed at that age. Whether I knew what it was about is irrelevant,
Mm.
but it has such a lasting impact, and it's something that I'm having to work through constantly.
And I think, you know, growing up, I think I was always, you know, you're put in the limelight, you be this, be that, whatever. And I think I told myself I was an extrovert. Like I convinced myself this is what I was, right? But actually, once I've had like a loud gathering, or as I've gotten older and I've had like a gathering, it's been great, but it's been like heavily chaotic and it's been a wonderful time. Nevertheless, I need like quiet. I need silence when I get home.
100%.
I need to recharge.
Yeah.
I need to, you know, to the point now as I get older, I'm like, do I want to go to this? I know what it's going to be like. Do I have energy for that today? Do I have capacity for that today? You know, do I have enough self-love to put a boundary down to say, "Nan verela indegi"?
Yeah. Oof.
Yeah. And that's been a really interesting journey that I've had to go through recently, because I'm like, it's not even just the noise, man. It's the opinions. It's just everything. It's just a lot of chaos. And
Yeah.
today I don't want chaos. You know, I
Yeah.
want calm. I choose the calm today.
Like with that, understanding your trauma and your triggers and your cues, it's like you see these things online where everyone talks about love languages. Like there are 5 love languages, and like, what are your love languages? It's common conversation that comes up with people who are sort of like in the
So
dating
what are the
scene.
like? Do we know what they are?
They
Let's
are
list
acts
them.
of service, physical touch. So that's like affection, doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. Quality time, words of affirmation,
and
gifts. Receiving gifts. And
I
when
should laugh. It's a great love language.
when I was looking into love languages, so I went through like 3 phases of it where I was like, I did the quiz, I got my 5 in my order, and then I was listening to something and they were like, your love languages are how you receive love, so like how you want someone to show love to you. Now apply those 5 to how you show love, because it could be different.
Yes.
And
yeah.
so like a typical example, like with me, my top love language is acts of service, right? But my top love language for like giving love is gifts,
Okay.
and gifts is on my bottom,
Yes.
but
Okay.
gifts is on my top on how I show love,
Okay.
which I
Okay.
find really interesting.
That is very interesting.
Because they're like the opposite end.
Because
when I
yeah.
want to receive love, I don't
Yeah.
necessarily want your gifts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like
yeah.
I say that gratefully, but
Yeah.
also, do you know what I mean?
And mine is quality time in the list of things.
Yeah.
I need quality time
Yeah.
with people that I love. But the way I think I show it is probably more words of affirmation.
Yeah.
Probably a little bit more of that than quality. I'm not like, let's spend time together. I'm like, so
I think you do a lot of acts of service as well.
and acts of service.
Yeah.
Actually, acts of service too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, how can I be of service to you?
Yes. So mine would be like gifts and then acts of
Yeah,
service
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, yeah.
But I found it quite striking that what is on the bottom of my list is at the top of my list of how I show love.
Interesting.
Um,
That already is like a podcast episode
yeah.
on itself.
Let's unpack that, Thanusha.
Yeah.
Next
yeah.
time, guys.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Yeah.
And then on top of that, you have like what people would call like your fight languages. They're completely different, but it's how your attachment styles in this sense show up when you are triggered. Like you become anxious, you become avoidant. Like, do you stonewall? Like, do you stop talking?
Do you stop? Yeah.
Do you just need some time away? Like, how do you communicate that? Like, do you leave your partner in a place where they are uncertain of what is to come? And like the impacts of that, like, yes, it's an overwhelming time for you and you are processing, but do you then take time to communicate that to your partner to be like, you know what? I just need a minute. I will circle back with you. Give me like a day or 30 minutes or, you know, and it's things like that where those kinds of things show up in relationships constantly, in friendships, in the workplace, constantly. And it's like that self-awareness work and understanding those things is what helps like harness a more healthy communication
absolutely
channel with whomever you're in any sort of relationship with.
Yep.
And simple things like that, because if your go-to reaction is to avoid, and that's fine because like you're in that moment and that's what you need, you can avoid and like you just distance yourself. But then what you've got is your counterpart who just doesn't know what the hell has happened. And of course, like if you do know your counterpart quite well, you can be like, they've gone into avoidance mode. Fine. But I will say it's not on them to understand that for you. Like, yes, they can have the understand. They can be like, okay, you've gone into avoidance mode. But I think you need to have the responsibility to be like, right, I've gone into avoidance mode.
Yeah.
I know I've gone into avoidance
Yeah.
mode. Let me just.
I need a minute.
Yeah.
Cool. So, speaking of uncomfortable, my last sort of Esther Perel words of wisdom section is about a woman who rang in, and because she's a sex therapist too, she had a woman call in who the biggest problem was she couldn't get aroused in the bedroom when being intimate with her partner.
Okay.
And to be a bit more explicit, she was actually just struggling to get wet during sex. And
That's uncomfortable.
that is very uncomfortable. And so that was the problem. And this one hit hard, ladies. This one hit so hard. It was so tough to listen to this one. And it came down to, because she is the woman, she's very successful. She brings in a lot of money, like just as much as her partner. She also takes care of the house. She also has children, and she's like full time in the day. She's taking care of everything. She's taking care of her husband. She's taking care of her children. She's taking care of everything all the time. In the bedroom, she couldn't let him take care of her.
Oh,
she couldn't.
Oh,
she kept seeing herself as, and what Esther goes on to say was, you're mothering children, you're mothering your husband. He doesn't really help with chores and stuff around the house and things like that. So you're mothering, you're in mother mode. You're in nurturing full mode. You're like in Mother Earth mode, and you're giving and giving and giving. And you cannot be vulnerable in the bedroom because you're also like, how can I give?
Yeah.
And she cannot sort of accept, she cannot be sexually dominated by her partner.
Yes.
She cannot let herself
yeah.
be that person. She feels like she can't be submissive, or she's not in her feminine energy.
She can't, it almost sounds like, despite those terms, it just sounds like she cannot just turn off.
Yeah. Like
to turn on.
Yes. She couldn't turn off. She couldn't turn off.
It sounds like her brain is just running on like full speed.
All the time. So yeah, and that was, she just couldn't let go in bed. And a lot of the conversation was, how can you try to disseminate parts of your wife duties or mother duties to your husband? And kudos to her, she was absolutely having the conversation with him. She was saying, look, I just can't see myself as not a caretaker, even in the bedroom. But she was like, I would love to be taken care of in the bedroom.
Yeah.
And sadly, like, I've given you like the whistle stop tour of how that podcast episode went. Definitely check it out if you would like to know more about how that went down. But it was really triggering, because I think as a woman, it's common
Absolutely
to feel that way that she has felt, because you're just like, what a chore it is to have sex. It's one more chore on my to-do list. Just washing, laundry, sex with my partner, clean the house.
And it's a lot.
It's
a lot. And I think also, coming back to sort of like how we've been raised in our communities, like our experiences, our lived experiences as women are so different, because we've ultimately received a completely different upbringing. We come from a society that is completely patriarchal, and so there is all of this, like, it is instilled in you from when you are young that you do everything to serve men. Like you said, whether you choose to act on that or not as an adult is entirely up to you. Yeah. So it doesn't surprise me that that's how a lot of women do feel, because we've sort of been molded to take the mental load. Like, even though physically we might not do everything because, you know, we have male counterparts in like a heteronormative relationship who can physically do more built like lifting work and the heavy lifting. The mental load, I feel like, is something that we don't really take enough notice of. And I see it presented in numerous ways. Like within siblings, it happens. Within relationships, it happens. Within friendships, it will happen.
Yeah. It's also like being intimate with your partner is not, or just being intimate in general, it's not just a physical thing. It's not.
Of
It's
course
not
not.
just two bodies collide. No, it's spiritual, it's emotional, it's everything.
Yeah. And I do also think it can very much be a physical thing when it needs to be.
That's what
Yeah.
If that's what you're going for, great, you know.
But where it is something where you want
more, or you want to encompass all of those things.
Yeah.
And you can't, or you're struggling to make that work. You need to have a conversation with your partner in regard to why is this happening. And I
just need to have conversations about sex generally, I think.
Yeah. And it's really sad because I think a lot of women don't talk about being sexually satisfied in bed. And I thought that's why this episode was really good, because a woman has just openly said, I am not. And, you know, she was really upset about it. She wasn't like, you know, this is the best thing ever. She was really, really down about it.
That's awful.
Really down. And, you know, she was crying. She was like, this is my marriage and I want it to be better. But I don't know how to be better. And it was just really, really heartbreaking and triggering and painful. And often, you know, especially in our parents' generation, sex wasn't for the woman, it was for the man. It was about how can we please them, because men have needs. Men have sexual desires, men have sexual needs. Yeah. So how can we be of service to them under Bahele?
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that can be passed down to your daughters, or sometimes even, you know, your children in general. I think that can sometimes be something that parents in general, they're just not talking about sex with their kids, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Like, our parents, it's not happening. I think I can just about dent it with my mom post-marriage 4 years later.
Yeah. I think that is a huge thing. Like the post-marriage aspect, like opening the doors to discussions about sex is like, okay, we're just gonna skate around the fact that it didn't happen.
Yeah. And I think a part of me now is like, you know, when you're trying to conceive or people are asking you if you are or blah, 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 I'm like, I'm just going to break the conversation about sex down. I'm just going to break that door down. And I'm just gonna be abrupt with them, because don't talk about my sex life.
Ooh, okay, girl.
Also because all this time you just haven't. All this time you've not once opened this conversation.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no.
How about you ask me if I orgasmed last night instead?
Oh my God.
Could you imagine?
Yeah. The question you should be asking me is your husband sexually satisfying you, and vice versa? Like that's question one.
Imagine?
That's question one. And I think even bringing up sex in this episode, we were just like, oh, say mama.
Yeah.
We were like, ooh.
Even me just saying the word.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, my mom's gonna see this. We're trying to be empowering.
Is like it's not uncommon that you have aunties in our generation who will turn around and be like, என்ன செய்யறது?
Yeah. Oh.
அது உங்களுக்கு இல்ல, அது அவங்களுக்கு.
Yeah.
And it's like there is this just understanding that men have this primal urge, a need to have sex, and you know, women also are very sexual beings. And that conversation just needs to be had.
Yeah.
Because that is how you break down like the stereotypes, the unconscious biases. That's how you have a relationship, and you build a relationship where both of you are being satisfied.
Absolutely.
And like
it's both of you. Are you both satisfied? It's not just the narrative of is one person satisfied is just not a thing anymore.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're working towards. And I'm really happy that we are working towards that, because if not now, then when? I'm scared, you know?
I can't wait to talk to like all my friends'
Yeah.
kids about sex.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be that auntie.
Yeah.
What did they teach you in sex ed?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, or don't believe what they taught you in sex ed.
Tell me what they taught you, and I'll tell you if it's right.
It's honestly, and I just, the like the conversation of women not being satisfied in bed, I've had so many times with so many of my friends, so many people, and it's not okay that we just let it go on. It's not okay. Like, you're gonna let this go on like this.
I feel like it needs to stop with our parents' generation.
Yeah.
There definitely may be couples in our parents' generation who had a wonderful sex life. But I can almost say with assurance that the vast majority of them did not. And that is so upsetting.
Or their idea of what they thought was perfect probably wasn't.
Oh!
Yeah. If you can't be vulnerable with your partner sexually, I think... Oh, controf. I think it's easier to be vulnerable with your partner physically than it is emotionally.
Yes.
Yes.
Because a lot of people use that intimacy
The physicality
as
of it to just...
as a coping mechanism, for sure.
But if you can't be vulnerable in that sense, it's going to block a lot of other channels, like your emotional vulnerability and other things. It's going to block a lot of those channels as well.
Yeah.
If you can't be having those conversations, so it's really important.
And I think particularly like when you are with your partner or the person who you are choosing to live your life with, it does challenge the dynamics because you are constantly in the same space together. You are living together, you're breathing together, you're eating together, everything together. And there's just so much that happens. And I don't think we talk about that as a community.
No.
And like just coming off of that, there is so much being raised by immigrant parents where you just do not talk. Do not tell, do not ask. You cannot talk about challenges in your relationship, in your personal life. You can't be perceived as a failure. And so,
Oh my gosh, yeah.
do you know what I mean? Everything rides on reputation.
Yeah.
And
Everything has to be amazing.
Yeah.
Like,
everything needs to be fine.
yeah.
Whatever's going on inside, other
Yeah,
verda
100%.
And it's just like it limits the ability to like lean into your friends and your family and your community as a whole for support.
Yeah. And I think, don't get me wrong, the conversation about I'm not satisfied in bed with your partner is a very hard conversation. I am not by any means trivializing how difficult it is to have that conversation, because I can imagine it can be quite painful. Other God doesn't mean you avoid it just because it's painful. And, it's incredibly important that you are having transparent conversations, especially when it comes to telling a man that you aren't satisfied in bed. And I'm sorry, but if the male's, instant knee-jerk reaction isn't to be like, how can I be better? I think it's a red flag. Because a woman, if was told that, odds on she's going to say, shit, what can I do?
Yeah.
What can I do?
Yeah. And that will probably usually spur off a conversation with her girlfriends to be like, this situation,
yes,
what do I do?
Yeah 100%. Yeah, but I know, it's tough though. I'm not going to say it's easy, and it will take maybe several conversations to sort of be like, this isn't working for me, can we try this? And I think both of you have to be open to fooling around and experimenting and having some fun. It's not my way or the highway. So yeah, that was a really interesting episode on, because you don't understand, you often forget the kind of burdens you take on mentally, and then you're in the bedroom, you're like, oh shit, like I'm thinking about what to cook tomorrow, and he's trying to be intimate with me. I don't have time. I don't have mental space.
So that sort of brings us to the end of today's episode, and we sort of wanted to finish out by talking about our parents' generation. And we've spoken a lot about them in today's conversation, and sort of how being raised by parents from a different culture, from a different part of the world, in this part of the world, has had its challenges when we are trying to understand where we fit into all of it. And I think what is important for us to recognize is that there is a lot of things that, whilst we're able to, in our generation, identify where maybe, you know, the sense of individualism is lacking in our community or with our parents or how we've been raised, there are things that our parents' generation went through that I don't think I personally can even fathom going through.
100%.
And I think a big part of this conversation that we're having and the things that we're doing in the space that we're creating here is that we're able to look at how we've been raised and identify where we need to do work and where we need to, you know, prioritize certain things, maybe pull back on certain things, and find that balance that makes sense for us. But in doing so, I think as a generation, we're a little bit here for just the good times. We're just like, we want it to be easy breezy. And by all means, that's understandable. Like, why should we just out here be looking for difficulty and challenges?
It's also the social media generation as well. You know, there's a lot of unachievable expectations out there. And I think a lot of us do strive to sort of have the aesthetics of what a marriage or relationship should look like. What we're trying to say here is that whilst we are scrutinized for dating or making mistakes whilst dating, or we don't feel as empowered to choose our partners, or parents don't let us, it's understanding that they actually have come through a lot of hardship. So I think for them, and their hardships were crazy hard, you know, like it's not just like, they went through some real battles in their life. And I think two things. One, you also do want to find a partner who can weather the storm with you in that way.
Oh, yes.
Like massive. That is something that is truly commendable to what they have achieved.
Yeah.
Because, you know, through thick and thin, maybe the reasons of staying aren't always the right reason.
Absolutely.
But
that
there is
unwavering, unwavering loyalty as well that is there. Like, ennendalam.
Like, you know, there is, and I don't think our generation has that as much.
Yes. And that's sort of like the here for the good times. Like, I think we want the rosiness, and you're not wrong for wanting that, but it's also recognizing that this journey in life with whomever we choose to pursue it with is not going to be smooth sailing in the least bit. And I think there is something to take away from our parents' generation in that there are definitely things that we can see from them and absorb how we wish to, of course, and apply in our lives that I think will benefit us in being able to weather some of those storms.
Yeah, and also, you know, whilst we can sit there and scrutinize like they're kandadam kadal and dang and they're getting married and stuff and all of that, I think it's understanding that although there came a sort of, it's not loyalty, but I thought there was some sort of loyalty that came with that. And in our generation, sort of trying to understand that kashtam anal enna is probably should be at the forefront of when you are going to select a partner. It should be, can I go through this with the person? Yes, we have like our credentials and we want the tick list and we know what we want aesthetically in their career, you know, emotionally, but a lot of it should be, can our marriage withstand some of the things that our parents may have gone through, or at least similar hardships? Can the marriage withstand this? Can the relationship withstand this? Not just dating, also in your normal relationships, your friendships. Like how does the relationship serve me in that long-term wise? Are we going to be cool? Are we going to be like, you know what? We've got the capacity to have the conversation. We've got the strength to get through some of these things. And it's difficult to kind of gauge that while you're dating. I understand that. But I think the overarching theme here is that it's not just about the hunky-dory days. It's not just about the kalyanal, it's about everything that comes after it. We kind of wanted that to be the take-home message from today's episode, that give them some grace, give yourself some grace. Please try and break down the walls and have the conversations about dating with your family that you can't have. Now's the time. If not now, then when? Thank you very much for listening. This is the Asian Other Tamil podcast.
We are your hosts, Thanusha
and Nishani. Bye.